Will more spending on NATO mean more protection or provocation? NATO Chief Mark Rutte thanked President Trump for making the world safer by attacking Iran's nuclear sites. But a unified stance on Ukraine is still in question. As President Zelenskyy claims Moscow will attack a NATO member within 5 years, how much is riding on unifying the alliance against all common enemies? I'm Andrea Sanke, and today's newsmaker is NATO. Not long ago, there was serious concern that U.S. President Donald Trump would drive NATO into irrelevance. But judging from meetings today in the Netherlands, the U.S. has instead put NATO at the forefront of Western defense against common threats, not just from its eastern flank, but from much further afield. Iran's nuclear program and, of course, the war in Ukraine helped convince NATO members to do what President Trump has long demanded: boost member states' military spending to 5% of GDP. But does a militarily stronger NATO mean a safer world or a greater chance of conflict? Here's a look.
Amid a world facing multiple crises, NATO allies have convened in The Hague for what many call one of the most consequential summits in the alliance's history. The deteriorating battle situation in Ukraine and tensions in the Middle East set a dark backdrop. At the core of this gathering is a pressing question: how far will NATO go, and at what price? It marks US President Donald Trump's first NATO summit since his return to the White House. Germany's new Chancellor Friedrich Merz and Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney also made their first appearances. Central to this year's agenda is a historic shift in defense spending. For the first time, NATO members are poised to commit to a combined 5% of GDP on military and security efforts, a target long championed by the United States. This ambitious spending increase covers everything from traditional military assets to cybersecurity and intelligence capabilities. Countries like Canada, once criticized for lagging behind, are now stepping up to meet these demands.
There is absolute clarity that the United States is totally committed to NATO, totally committed to Article 5, and yes, there is also an expectation, which will be fulfilled today, that the Canadians and the Europeans will speed up their spending, making sure that we not only are able to defend ourselves against the Russians and others, but also to equalize, and this is fair.
Yet unity remains fragile. Spain's Prime Minister, Pedro Sánchez, voiced opposition to the new spending target, citing pressing domestic priorities and economic challenges.
We understand the difficulty of the geopolitical context. We fully respect, of course, the legitimate desire of other countries to increase their investment in defense if they so wish, but we are not going to do so.
Meanwhile, President Trump shifted focus away from these internal disputes, emphasizing diplomatic efforts with Russia and the escalating tensions with Iran. At a joint press briefing, Trump defended the recent US strikes on Iranian nuclear sites as a necessary move to end the conflict.
We're actually getting along with them very well right now. But had we not succeeded with that hit ended the war. That hit ended the war. I don't want to use an example of Hiroshima. I don't want to use an example of Nagasaki. But that was essentially the same thing.
Outside the summit halls, voices rose demanding more clarity and accountability. The spotlight extended beyond budgets to the human cost of conflicts in Ukraine and Gaza, raising urgent questions about NATO's responsibilities.
All NATO countries have a legal obligation under the Genocide Convention when there is a risk of genocide. And what we have been witnessing for the past 20 months is NATO countries basically being complicit, even supporting the genocide, and we want to call that out.
Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy attended an informal dinner despite the absence of any NATO-Ukraine Council meeting this year. Meanwhile, a sidelined meeting between Zelenskyy and President Trump is scheduled for Wednesday, highlighting Kiev's urgent call for sustained Western support. As the summit concludes, NATO appears more unified than ever on military spending, Yet global accountability and moral leadership remain deeply contested. With Ukraine still under relentless attack and tensions with Iran high, the critical question remains: where will NATO draw its line?
Well, joining me now to take a closer look at NATO's challenges are from London, research affiliate at Cambridge University's Centre for the Study of Existential Risk, Paul Ingram. Also from the British capital, senior visiting research fellow at the King's College London's Russia Institute, Anna Matvieva. And from Washington, senior fellow and director of the Future of DHS project at the Atlantic Council, Thomas Warwick. Thanks all so much for being with me. You know, contrary to the mood we've seen on screen, NATO is under a tremendous amount of pressure right now, not least with Moscow declaring the EU a, quote, bona fide enemy of Russia and a direct threat to Moscow. That just was said today. And, of course, all this off the back of the U.S. bombing Iran's nuclear program sites. So, Paul, I'll start with you. Do you feel this conference is serving as a reassuring show of unity or something rather ominous?
I think that the context is challenging. When the leaders are sitting there around in The Hague each other, there is certainly a great deal of concern. But at the same time, these leaders are agreeing a massive increase in defence spending that is goes way beyond the particular threat capacities that they're looking to address. And I think that we are entering an incredibly worrying time where NATO is engaging in an arms race with Russia. And where the action that we've seen in the Middle East demonstrates a certain disregard for international law and the rules-based system. So we are entering into very troubled times, and NATO does not seem to be hesitating in driving as well as responding to this deeply retrograde step at a moment when we should be cooperating far more effectively within the international community.
Okay, Anna, do you envision as well a sort of arms race with Moscow? And also we had President Zelenskyy saying Russia could actually attack a NATO member now within 5 years. How does Moscow also view that statement? And also, I mean, does it smack a little bit of Benjamin Netanyahu also saying Iran could have a nuclear bomb within a few weeks over the course of years and years saying that?
So Zelenskyy has been saying similar things since before the war actually started. So in that sense, in Moscow's eyes, it's no news. Whatever threat he can use regarding Moscow to persuade the West to commit more weapons, to commit more aid, to commit more resources, more financial support, more sanctions in Russia, he will use it. So in Russian eyes, they see it as, okay, that's what Zelenskyy is. They're more interested in the reception he's getting. And the reception which he is getting now a bit more mixed. This is also because of Trump, but also because, frankly speaking, the world and the NATO summit is overtaken by the events, which are now far more greater than Ukraine. For example, just to give you an example, 3 weeks ago, I was at Chatham House. Mark Rutte was giving a speech in which he was asked whether Ukraine is on a irreversible path to NATO. And he said, yes, definitely, and that would be entered in the final communique of the Hague summit. Guess what now? This summit is not really about Ukraine, and the draft statement, which has been sort of circulated, is not really making any strong even mention of Ukraine in a very kind of committed terms. So that means that the world is changing very rapidly. NATO is trying to catch up. Rutte is fighting for survival. European Union is becoming far more militarized, can overtake NATO in significance by and large. So it is quite a difficult game that the Secretary-General has to play now.
Okay, interesting perspective. Thomas, I don't know if I misread your facial expression. You seem to look a little skeptical with Anna's.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Well, I would have almost the opposite view of what both of your distinguished guests have said. Doctors around the world take an oath first to do no harm, and the Hague Summit has achieved that minimum level. Calling for increased defense budgets is long overdue and is something that both Democratic and Republican administrations in Washington have pushed for, but Donald Trump has pushed for it far harder and far more effectively than other U.S. presidents. This would give NATO countries, especially those on the eastern flank and countries like Turkey, a considerable advantage in terms of protecting their peoples against possible misadventures, no matter what the cause. Yes, it is true that this NATO summit did not settle NATO's position regarding Ukraine, but that actually is several years away from anything real actually happening. And it's also the case that the war between Israel and Iran threw a spanner into the works for everybody. President Trump feels that he has acted decisively. However, his Defense Intelligence Agency is telling him the job is not finished. He will now have to turn to diplomacy, not military action. And we'll see whether Iran comes back to the bargaining table. So a lot is still up in the air.
Right. I mean, Paul, Mark Rutte actually told Trump, as we know, that he's made the world safer. But now, of course, we have this U.S. intelligence saying that Iran's nuclear program has not been dismantled or destroyed. The administration, of course, disputes that. They've called it all fake news. But, I mean, what is NATO's thinking now on this? And is everyone, do you think, at least on board with Rutte's leadership in that respect?
Well, clearly not everybody, but the Western European members of NATO seem to be following Rutte's leadership and were welcoming the military action by implication by focusing on Iran's nuclear capability rather than condemning Israel's action. So I think there is some degree of unity between Western European states and the United States and the action there in Iran. But, when we zoom out, I think there's a great deal of skepticism, concern, and outright condemnation from large quarters of the rest of the world for this action, because, as I say, it was deeply illegal, and it is a step towards a world that is governed by might is right, dominate or be dominated mindsets, and I don't think that makes the world a safer place. Quite the opposite. And I think, as has just been hinted at, the diplomatic arena is the only way of dealing with Iran's nuclear program, and that has been set back dramatically with Iran's parliament agreeing today not to cooperate with the agency. We have no idea where that highly enriched uranium is that could be further enriched to supply 10 or 11 nuclear weapons. There is not a great deal of appetite to resolve this issue within Iran, and the whole pitch has been queried. So whether Natanz and Fordow have been destroyed or not, I think is almost irrelevant. I think the intention in Iran has dramatically changed. The calculus has changed, and I think that it will be very difficult for those opposing weaponization within the country to prevail in ways that they have done up to now.
Okay. Thomas, I could see you disagree, but first let me come to Anna, because we also have President Trump saying that he's spoken to Vladimir Putin and that Putin offered to help on Iran. So can you explain what kind of relationship they really have on this issue?
Well, we cannot get into Putin and Trump's heads, but my reading of what has been happening, that Putin said that they would be prepared to act as a mediator because they have a good relationship with Iran, but of course they also speak to Israel. Israel is not a hostile party towards Russia, as the Kremlin sees it. But that Trump said that, okay, let us deal with your issue first. And then if we need to do something on Iran, I will come back to you later. That probably told Putin that Trump has something in mind, which he's going to do, and he is not going to involve Putin in it. And that whatever action he will take would create a new situation. And depending on how that new situation shapes, then he might involve Russia into the aftermath. Because from a Russian point of view, Iran is in the regional neighborhood. They do not want to have uncontrollable nuclear proliferation issue with Iran. They also do not want to see regime change, because that would create this instability in the whole kind of regional neighborhood, the South Caucasus, Central Asia, refugees. So in that sense, Russian and Trump's agenda sort of align in that sense.
Okay.
But certainly Trump is now keeping Moscow at a distance for now.
Okay. So, Thomas, I mean, how could Trump actually balance what NATO wants re-Ukraine versus what the U.S. wants with Putin and with Russia, more specifically what Donald Trump wants with Putin and Russia?
Well, yeah, so we actually know what was going on with the Putin-Trump conversation. Trump wanted Putin to carry a message to the leaders in Iran that they needed to accept his deal, under which Iran would give up its nuclear weapons program, give up its control over enrichment. In return, the United States would give up the economic sanctions that have crippled Iran's economy for 45 years. And in Trump's mind, that was a really good deal for the Iranian people. And he wanted Putin to help sell that to the leaders in Tehran. We'll obviously see if that diplomatic initiative works out. But beyond that, what Trump said he could do by ending the war in Ukraine on day one has obviously not worked out. And the Trump administration is taking less and less of an interest in Ukraine, in part, of course, because it has other crises to deal with. This really does leave the initiative to European leaders, but they will have to significantly increase their military production capabilities if they want to actually contribute to Ukraine's defense.
Yep. Paul, what's your take on that?
Well, I think that the Europeans are some way away from having the capacity to step into the gap left by Trump if he does reduce his supplies to Ukraine. And it's not just military equipment that's a problem. It's the number of men being annihilated on the front, and Ukraine does not have the level of replacements that the Russians do. So this is a real problem for seeing this war carry on. And of course, war doesn't solve these problems. And particularly this war at the moment, where there's been a grinding confrontation and people dying and not much shifting other than Russia gaining ground. So I think there needs to be some new thinking, and I think we desperately need some negotiations. There are ideas out there. People are starting to put together quite serious negotiating frameworks and proposals for ceasefires that are not just simple sort of demands for 30-day ceasefires that we've seen up to now, but are more sophisticated, because they have to be. We do have to be meeting some of the underlying drivers that have led Russia to invade Ukraine, and for this deep confrontation to be transformed. That's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to be Trump that resolves this, but Trump will have to be involved, because it is only that sort of leadership whispering at the top that is going to offer something that incentivizes Putin to negotiate more seriously than he has done up to now.
Anna, is there any effort, do you see, being made to address those underlying drivers of the war in Ukraine that Paul was talking about? Because fundamentally, I guess, if that's not addressed, there's really no chance to find peace, much less a proper kind of, working relationship to de-escalate what's happening.
Yes, I think you are right, and Paul is right. I agree with that. I also think that we're seeing just the beginning of a process, because for over 3 years, what we have just seen is that a war forever scenario. Now we started to see alternative scenarios. They might not be necessarily immediately implementable. They might not be even very serious, like 30-day ceasefire, but there is already some substantial thinking. And Trump, to his credit, I think he does understand concerns of both sides. And he has started something which is much more substantial. But we are now discussing NATO summit. That is also relevant. Where NATO is relevant for the war in Ukraine. Is NATO involved as an alliance? No, it is not. Are all NATO members are in absolute unity on the war in Ukraine? Again, not quite clear. Turkey is a case in point. Then NATO becomes much more of a political issue rather than a military issue. The issue which we are talking about relevant for Ukraine is membership for Ukraine. If that's off the table, that would create different parameters of the whole negotiations, the whole deal, potentially a peace deal, but also NATO's own future. What is it? Is it actually doing something? Or it has become some kind of symbolic outlet to peg East-West confrontation on?
Right. So, Thomas, will it even be discussed at this meeting? What Anna was saying about just taking Ukraine's membership of NATO off the table, which is what Russia would like to see. Will they be looking at that, or is it just too contentious to really tackle right now, given what's happening with Iran?
Well, I think most world leaders realize that it's a non-starter as long as Donald Trump is president, but the day he is no longer president, it will be back on the agenda. I think there's another important point to be made about this moment. There are only two examples in the world today where it's the state policy of a regional power to destroy another state. That's Iran's stated intention to destroy the state of Israel and Putin's stated intention to destroy the country of Ukraine as an independent country. Both of these are the real drivers of the wars that we are seeing in the Middle East. The prospect of Iran changing its position is low. The prospect of Putin changing his mind is even lower. And so to say that there are somehow going to be diplomatic initiatives that change these two approaches is clearly mistaken. We're in a world in which, as Clausewitz, the German military philosopher, said, war is the continuation of policy by other means. While everyone would like to see diplomacy settle these conflicts, they're going to be backed up by military force. And the heart of the NATO summit this year, as every year, is that NATO is the most powerful military alliance in the history of planet Earth. The question is, will that power be used for good or not at all? And that's actually a dilemma we're still trying to understand.
Paul, go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I agree with some of that, but this analysis that the Russians and the Iranians somehow their only and one policy here is to destroy another country is far too simplistic. I mean, the Russians have a very maximalist a set of demands over Ukraine, and Ukraine cannot offer. They're not capable. It's not in their gift to offer solutions that the Russians are demanding there. So I think that is more a communication with NATO and with the United States.
Since they're actually asking for Russia.
And it's the United States that can offer Russia something that is not in those maximalist demands. I don't believe that Russia is going to carry on fighting this war until Ukraine is destroyed. Words are very different from actions, and we see that from Trump several times a day, and the way he uses words to create symbolic shifts and changes. I think we have to take countries at their action. We have to take their words with a bucket of salt, and we have to understand that things are far more complex than the simplistic analysis that we often hear about what other countries, what motivates other countries. I know that the Islamic Republic is a very complex set of all sorts of dimensions, most of which are never discussed on Western media at all. And Israel is almost irrelevant to the outcomes of Iranian politics.
Okay, some common ground then found slightly between Thomas and Paul there at least. But Anna, where do you stand?
I think that, again, as in Iran, as Paul just said, there is, if you like, a party of war and party of peace. There is quite a significant body of the Russian elite, within the ruling elite as well, saying that we need to end the war in Ukraine on somewhat favorable conditions, but obviously having some kind of compromise. We are sort of prepared for them. There is also a body of people who are saying, no, actually, Ukraine is on the breaking point. And our goal is to push as hard, as fast as we can, so that perhaps we have a strategic advantage.
Anna, that will have to be the final word for this edition of the Newsmakers. I'd like to thank all three of my panelists so much for being with us, and our viewers for joining us as well. Remember, you can follow us on social media, and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.